The people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. Amen. How can we find joy even in the darkness? The temperatures on the morning of December 22nd, 1998 were in the 60s with intermittent blasts of spring-like rain. And I watched the showers through the long windows of Lamont Library at Harvard College. Walking back at lunch, the temperature, as you can imagine, in New England, all of a sudden it was winter again. And I arrived back into my apartment to have lunch and noticed that the little light on the answering machine message was flashing. I just didn't even bother listening to answering machine, but I called my wife, and she started just talking, like small talk, and I'm like, what did the doctor say? And she said, I'm pregnant. And I was just so filled with joy. It was the most extraordinary moment, and there's absolutely no way I can communicate what it felt like. But I immediately rushed into her office, and I remember getting on the subway in Cambridge, being one person, and then getting off the subway on the other and being a totally different person. You know, where everything was shining, every person, everything seemed so significant. And when I saw Heidi, I just embraced her. We just kind of held on to each other for a little bit, and then we separated and just called everybody we knew. That moment, God felt so near to me. God seemed to rejoice with me, in me. It is one thing to experience a flash of awe when you see a sunset through the pine trees at a high Sierra lake, or when the light filters in through the stained glass window of a great cathedral, and you know and have a sense for how many people have been there before you, or when you hear the closing chords of a symphony and it sounds like heaven. But it is another thing to have a personal experience of God. Not as an idea, not as a force in the way that we talk when we say the universe caused some unlikely event, not an aloof creator who made everything and left us to our own devices, but God as a person who cares about this world, who hears our prayers and seeks a deeper connection with us, a God who forgives. Now, I have no idea what you're thinking on an ordinary day, but I encourage you to try on this way of experiencing the world tonight, because this is the heart of the Christmas story. God does not just want to listen from a distance, but to be personally involved in our life. God does this because we walk in darkness, and we obviously need God's help. And so at Christmas, God does not blast away all the enemies of the good, but steps into history and overturns the rules of the social order by being born in a barn, by being laid in a feeding trough. Tonight, we celebrate what Ephraim of Syria in the 4th century calls the baby who holds the reins of the universe, or in the words of G.K. Chesterton in the 20th century, the moment when the hands that made the sun and the stars were too small to reach the huge heads of cattle. At the end of Immanuel Kant, the philosopher's book, Critique of Pure Reason, he argues that philosophy seeks to answer 3 questions. What can I know? What should I do? And what may I hope? These 3 questions help me to understand joy. So first, what can we know? At the age of 12, in a confirmation class, the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson lost his faith. The other kids in the class weren't very cool, and the minister didn't give a very convincing answer when Peterson asked him to reconcile the Bible's creation stories with science. And he rejected religion as something for weak, ignorant, and superstitious people. Peterson took all that youthful energy and idealism and he threw it behind utopian visions of economic redistribution. He got involved in student government and the Socialist Party, but over time, he began to see that the world is more complex than we can imagine. And he lost this new form of fervently held faith when he realized that he and his fellow socialists did not really like the poor that much after all. Not long after that, Peterson began having terrible nightmares, awful ones. They continued to haunt him during the daytime. He had this one recurring dream where he was in the basement with his cousin, and his cousin was a beautiful young woman, and she was electrocuted. And he came upstairs, and as he came out of the basement, the entire town had been completely destroyed by a nuclear Armageddon. These dreams began to make him feel anxious and depressed during life until religion saved him. Studying Carl Jung, he began to understand that our world is a place of things best explained by scientific methods. But the world is also a forum for action where we have values, set goals, and accomplish aims. The subjective element lies at the heart of our experience. It is the world of stories and symbols that orient our lives. Perhaps the symbol that matters to us most is what Carl Jung calls our persona, the way that we appear to others and to ourselves. Jung writes, and this is a longer quotation, so hang with me there. Quote, "When we analyze the persona, we strip off the mask and discover that what seemed to be individual is at bottom collective. In other words, that the persona was only a mask of the collective psyche. Fundamentally, the persona is nothing real. It is a compromise between individual and society as to what a person appears to be." So let me be clear. Even the symbol that is us comes from a kind of tension between social forces and personal drives. This means that even what is closest to us remains a kind of mystery to our conscious thought. We do not have direct access even to who we are. That's what we know. My second question is, what should we do? You are a kind of symbol to yourself, and Christ is a symbol in a similar kind of way. You might think of Jesus as having a mission to change our picture of ourselves so that we might become real children of God, working for the sake of God's realm for peace and justice. This year, our Cathedral's theme has been body, and people have been asking me so much lately what I've learned over this whole course of this year. We talked about bodies of people who were detained at the border or who are in prison. We discussed healthcare, inequality, aging, pain, and pleasure. And this is what I learned. Jesus did not come here to leave us with something to think about. He gives us concrete things to do, ways of being in our bodies and with other bodies. Jesus did not spend his last night on earth quizzing the disciples about what they should believe. Instead, he taught them to wash each other's feet, to share a meal, to explore a way of being in which the greatest leader acts as servant of all. Jesus doesn't say, "Believe this in remembrance of me." He says, "Do this in remembrance of me." We have a hard time, I think, hearing the truth of the Christmas story because it's become overlaid with so much nostalgia and sentimentality. Really, it is a story about two ways of existing, two ways that are still at total war with one another. On the one hand, you have the arrogance of the emperor's decree that all the world should be registered. All the world, everyone. When you hear this, you should think of inescapable surveillance technology, cell phone location data, facial recognition cameras, disinformation campaigns, targeted killings, secret police, all the apparatus that makes it possible for the state to punish dissent. You should think of paying taxes that fund the brutal armies that torture you. In contrast to this, we have a child from God and with God, born as a poor refugee in a barn, invisible to the empire, but recognized by the homeless, uncounted, undocumented shepherds abiding in their fields. And an angelic army offers a counter decree to them, bringing good news of great joy for all people. To you is born the Messiah. So here we have the Roman Emperor Augustus and the baby Jesus, two individuals inhabiting totally different worlds with two conflicting visions of reality. So what should we do? Act. Act out of desire, not for power, but love. Share a holy meal, care for each other. My final question is, what should we hope? The theologian Karl Barth points out that at its heart, life is movement in time. We are continually desiring, striving to reach our goals and guided by ideas and relationships and obligations and hopes. For Barth, joy happens when this movement is stopped by something unexpected. It is a moment of stillness, when our life ceases to have a goal and just becomes a gift. It is like that day when I learned that Heidi was pregnant. We dream of this genuine life, and in holy moments, little moments in between things that happen tonight, we experience it. Barth writes, joy is the simplest form of gratitude. And he also writes, we can close ourselves off to joy. We can harden ourselves against it. We can be caught in the rut of life and movement. We can try to be merely busy. Barth goes on. To be joyful is to expect that life will reveal itself as God's gift of grace. We cannot force it to happen, but we can stay open to it through prayer and worship and caring for others. These actions open a door for us to step out of time and into joy. How can we find joy in the darkness? What can we know? We will always be a mystery to ourselves. This is a world of things, but it is also a world of ideas and goals and values and desires and the symbols that reveal these forces to us. What should we do? We need to worry less about thinking the right thoughts and more about how we treat each other's bodies. As the powers of authoritarianism rise with new technologies and a changing culture, we need to choose Christ's path of love, vulnerability, and involvement. What should we hope? That we will not be merely busy, but always ready to receive the gift of our life from God. Let joy, which is gratitude, remain at the heart of our life and all our stories about it. The people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. I am bringing good news of great joy for all people. To you is born the Messiah. Merry Christmas.